We're here together today with Rabbi Aaron Kotler, who's the CEO of Beth Medrash Govoha in Lakewood, an extremely important institution. It's the largest postgraduate Torah institution in the world, not just outside Israel, in the world. And it's an extraordinary place. It's a place of tremendous growth. There are huge numbers of Jewish children in Jewish day schools. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about Jewish future, because that's really what this discussion is going to be about. But joining him on the discussion is Howard Friedman, Howie, with whom I go back many years. We were together in Baltimore in the 1980s, and in fact spent a Yom Kippur sitting next to each other quite some years ago. He has since gone on to be a founding partner in Lanx. He was also president and chairman of the board of AIPAC, and is on the board of the Orthodox Union, and an extremely influential and important individual in the Jewish world in the United States and at large. So two very distinguished guests with us today. And so I want to take this opportunity of welcoming you both. This video is going out live, is Zoom. We're all having to embrace technology that we were rather more unfamiliar with 3 months ago, and we're going to talk about that. And this is also being recorded for a YouTube that will go out later today, and it's going to be shared, I'm sure, hundreds and thousands of times across the internet. I want to begin by saying that I think that we have, over the past 3 months, experienced something that nobody in history has ever experienced. That means there's never been this level of connectivity, of intertwinedness, if there is such a word, between the entire world. A pandemic hit the world, wherever it came from and however it spread. Every single country on every continent has been affected, and we've seen things happen in a way that's never happened before. So even though we've had world wars, a First World War and a Second World War, there were parts of the world which were somewhat unaffected by the World War, and life continued somewhat as usual. But here we have all been affected. In particular in the United States, because of something that happened a couple of weeks ago, which we're going to talk about, we've had an additional experience of a collective societal reaction to something, and the combined effect of all of that is it's made people feel very insecure. It made people realize that all the things that we take for granted cannot be taken for granted. And particularly for the Jewish nation, for Jews living in the United States, but across the world. And we are vulnerable to being attacked and being blamed for things that are not our fault. We have suddenly felt more vulnerable here in the United States than perhaps we've felt for decades or ever. So with that, I'd like to ask, at least initially, Rabbi Kotler to give his remarks and his reaction to this unprecedented moment in history. And then we're going to speak to Howie and take it from there. So Rabbi Kotler, what is your reaction to that introduction?
Well, first, Rabbi, it's wonderful to be back with you all at Young Israel of North Beverly Hills. I had already been with your beautiful community twice for Shabbat, once last year and once about 2 or 3 years ago as scholar in residence. And as I said from the bima of your beautiful shul, the warmth, the friendliness, the connectivity that your congregants have in your beautiful community are an example for the entire Jewish people. So all this connectivity that we're talking about in the world has always been there in the Young Israel of North Beverly Hills. And it's certainly to your credit as the rabbi and the Rebbitzin, but also to all those in your beautiful community. And may you go, may Chayil El Chayil in that.
Thank you.
Thomas Friedman, a number of years ago, wrote a book about the world being flat. And of course, he wasn't referring geographically to a flat world, but how the world had flattened from the rise of trade between countries, and of course, communication methodologies. And some of what we think are new might not really be so new. Communication in the ancient Roman Empire was remarkably efficient. I recently finished reading 2 books about communication in Europe, both a book on Marconi, written by Eric Larson, probably the single best book that if I could say that Larson wrote about connectivity and how the wireless had united the world. So if you look at the history of the world, I think there's always been a sense that we're more connected than the preceding generation, but it might not change the fundamentals of the world. So as you said, Rabbi, we're very, very connected, and leading a Friedman to write How the World is Flat. That obviously means something that happens in Wuhan or in some other place has impact on us here. I'm not sure it changes the fundamental nature of the human being, the soul, the spirit of the human being, how we react. A famous man once said that every revolution eats its young. The only exception, of course, was the American Revolution. And that's why we are so fortunate to live in a particular society here in the United States. Unlike the French, the Russian, other revolutions, Spanish revolutions, our revolutions to date have not eaten their young, and they have not eaten also the other group that always gets consumed by a revolution, which is the Jewish people. Khmelnytsky's uprising was a peasant uprising against the overlords in Ukraine in his day in the late 1600s. So these are unsettling times. What magnifies the feeling that they are unsettling times is the feeling that what happens anywhere in the world has immediate impact on us. Something that happens in Minneapolis is immediately felt in New York or Lakewood. The human reaction is really all the same. It's about fear and it's about hope. And we Jews, we've had our share of fear, but we've always been about hope. We're always hopeful to a better future. We know that the world will become a better place inexorably. Sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We'll make progress as a world, as a society, and then we'll fall back a little bit. But we are extremely confident, as we say every day in the Ani Mamin Be'emunah Shalema, B'vias HaMashiach. We know the world is on a path to perfection. And I think as Jews, that's the best perspective to keep in mind, whether it's a pandemic or it's people protesting injustice as they should, or it's a riot or anything else going on around the world.
You know, it's extremely important to recognize that Jews become the focus even if they have nothing to do with the situation. Obviously, it's not something we necessarily need to widely advertise, but here in Los Angeles, for example, at UCLA, there was a survey or some type of thing that went round that had to be signed by people, in which the method that was used by the former police officer in Minneapolis to restrain George Floyd was ascribed to a training by Israeli police officers or Israeli experts. And immediately, suddenly, the focus of attention is not policing in Minneapolis, it's the so-called Jewish Zionist influence on the United States. And hundreds, thousands of people signed this petition, which went to the leaders of UCLA. Howie, I know that you led AIPAC, and you're extremely sensitive to this aspect of American society because you're focused on the US-Israel relationship in that role at AIPAC. How do you assess the direction that society is going in terms of its effect on the Jewish community at large and on the body politic of this country?
Well, thank you, Rabbi Dunner. Good to see you again, and thank you for having me. Listen, I think that we're in the middle of some tragedies now, which are going on, right? A tragedy, obviously, of the coronavirus, a tragedy of what happened in Minneapolis, and that's hurting the body politic and hurting the way Americans think, like Rabbi Kotler said, both about the Jewish community and even in terms of how we deal with Israel, because they're focusing more domestically. if I could talk about tragedy, because I was just doing the Daf Yomi Shabbos, and if with your permission, Rabbi Kotler's permission, if I could tell a little Dvar Torah, it's usually the rabbis say Dvar Torah, but I'm going to have the layman say Dvar Torah. In this coming week's Torah portion, right, Ba'aloscha, there are two inverted nuns that surround the two psukim, the verses of Vahi B'tzar Aaron and Benucha Yoma, which we say, as you know, when you take the Torah in and out of the ark, and when we turn it. Why are they inverted, right? We don't see it anywhere else in the Torah. So the Gemara in Shabbos, which again we're doing the Daf, teaches us the purpose of the inverted nuns is to separate between one tragedy and another tragedy, right? The tragedy before Vahi B'tzar was that the Jewish people ran away from Mount Sinai just like a child runs away from school. And the tragedy after Benucha Yoma was a tragedy of desire, where the Erev Rav desired meat in the desert. Even though they had the man, it tasted like meat, but it didn't have the consistency of meat, right? So even though it was a higher level of food, they still complained, right? So Rav Yasher Ber Soloveitchik explained that the Jews were literally one day's journeys away from entering the promised land. Just one day, right? He's explaining why the choice of Vahi B'tzar Aaron and Benucha Yoma. And the Rav said they would have entered at that time. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu would have led them in, and the Jews we wouldn't be here talking today in America, because the Jews never would have had another moment of exile. However, as a result of these desirous individuals, right, who mistook a blessing for a tragedy, the course of events were altered, that non-revocable, right? And neither Moshe nor the Jewish people were able to go in the promised land in this time. And that's why Vahi B'tzar Aaron and Benucha Yoma were chosen to separate between one tragedy and another. Right? And so that's what happens to, that this was, I guess, what was supposed to happen to the Jewish people. But I think what I take from that, right, what the Gemara says and what the Rav says, is that the opportunity was not lost, right? Right, it would have been the end of our exile, the end of the torment, the end of us being subject to have enemies of the Jewish people. And that opportunity was lost. For 3,500 years, we're paying the price. What makes us realize is an opportunity cannot be missed. So here, we're at a time where we have two tragedies. Obviously, I think not as bad as what we're talking about there, but tragedies. And we have issues in America that if this tragedy hadn't happened by the Jewish community, we wouldn't have had. We would have been in Israel, right? And we wouldn't be working. There would have been no AIPAC, right? And everything would have been fine. But that's how God obviously wanted it to happen for whatever reason. So I think we have to take the opportunity to seize the moment in two ways, right? One, say, what can we do better for the Jewish community? What could we do better to make sure that we, internal Jewish community, because as you know, many of the fights go on among Jews who don't agree with each other. And yes, we don't have to agree. I don't agree with my wife, right, on a lot of things, right? Because, she's more liberal than me, right? But I still like her, I guess, right? I do. Of course, she's not listening. I love my wife, right?
Going on YouTube.
Well, thank you. But we on YouTube. Be careful. But I'm saying, but we don't have to. You don't have to agree on everything, right? Who says you have to agree? So we don't need to agree, but we have to love each other. We have to, when we argue, we just argue. But then at the end, as soon as the argument is over, we have to be best friends. We as Jews have to agree to get along in America. That's one. And two, we then have to look at our external responsibilities, right? Getting along with other people out of the community, right? Whether it's the African American community and other communities of faith who are part of the Tzelem Elokim, part of the Tikkun Olam, and helping them. And we want to get along with them and understand their suffering and their unique degree of suffering as well. So let's put that on. And the next part is Israel. Our brothers and sisters are in Israel. Our responsibilities as American Jews is to build a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. It's not good enough to say someone else is doing it. We have to take this opportunity to seize the moment, right? An opportunity that can't be missed. And this is our time to do things like that.
Well, one of the great pioneers of Jewish life in the United States, immediately in the aftermath of the Holocaust, in fact, during the years when the Holocaust was occurring, was Rabbi Kotler's namesake, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, who was the founder of Lakewood Yeshiva, and of course, and you have a photo of him in the background there,
Yes.
Howard.
Yep, my study.
It's wonderful. And my family connection with the Kotler family goes back even from before the time of the Holocaust. If I remember correctly, Rabbi Kotler's mother babysat my father in Memel in the late 1930s. So it's going back quite a few years. My my question to you, Rabbi Kotler, is this. And by the way, I need to show our viewers that the smicha that I have hanging on my wall, can you see it there? Is from Beth Medrash Govoha, my father, who was a trustee of BMG, going back, I don't know, is it 30 years, 40 years? How many years is it, Rabbi Kotler?
It's got to be at least 30.
It's many, many years. He was, of course, invited by your late father, Rabbi Kotler, to join the trustees in all those years ago. And he insisted that when I got the smicha, it had to be from BMG. Nowhere else would do.
Only
So,
the best.
Only the
best.
best.
The best.
Your grandfather was an extraordinary individual, ably assisted by some of the greatest askonim, communal activists America has ever produced. We live in, I wouldn't say the same type of crisis that he lived in, but also in a crisis period. What would your advice be? And you yourself are a rabbi and an askan. What would your advice be to people who want to emulate the incredible foresight and fortitude of your grandfather to do something meaningful today? Not to just wait for things to happen, but to do something meaningful to change the future of the Jewish people in this country and around the world, and particularly now because of the state of Israel. And your grandfather was not a Zionist by any stretch of the imagination, ensured that there was cooperation between the Haredim and the government of the state of Israel, created the school system there, which was incredibly important for those who were struggling to find Jewish identity, even in the state of Israel. What would your advice be, broadly speaking, for those who want to do something more and make a difference?
The more we know about the beauty and richness of our heritage and culture, the more proud we are willing to be about who we are, not in a bad way, but in a confident way. We represent the greatest tradition in the history of humanity. We represent the Jewish people, 3,300 years old, with the most amazing lessons that the world still hasn't really figured out. Lo sirtzach. You can't keep your knee on a guy's neck for 8 minutes because it's in the Torah. Lo sirtzach. Everybody is equal. Everyone has to be treated fairly. Hashem loves the orphan and the blind and the sick. Hashem loves the underdog. Social justice, all the things that we hear in society, they really come from the Jewish tradition. They don't come from other traditions. Not that those are bad people, they just don't come from those other traditions. We know where the values that humanity is seeking today, they stem from our beautiful tradition. As Jews, the prouder we are to live as Jews, the more of an impact we have on people. And look, I see a lot of people, I like to learn from the Hasidim. I'm not Hasidic, but I like to learn from them. They're willing to go out in full Hasidic garb, visibly identifiable as a Jew. And that to me is something. It's a point of pride. This is who I am. You know, sometimes you're out on the street and you might be in an uncomfortable place and you're thinking, should I wear my yarmulke? Should I not wear my yarmulke? Maybe if you always wear a yarmulke, you think about putting on a baseball cap. No, be absolutely proud of who you are. Don't be embarrassed to wear your Judaism on your sleeve. We represent the best and the brightest. And despite the events of the world, we represent the best of the world in every way, be it in moral leadership, be it in spiritual leadership. We don't want to talk about economic leadership. Israel talks about scientific leadership. God gave us a role and a mission in the world as the chosen people for the world. The prouder we are of that, without arrogance, without a sense of we're better than you, we just have more responsibilities than other people. The greater awareness we have of that, the more we instill that in our families, our communities, our students, our children, the truer we will be to our mission and the greater effect we'll have on the rest of mankind. And you can't separate, in my view, Tikkun Olam from the Jewish tradition. It doesn't work. There was a man named Karl Marx who tried that. He thought, you know what, I'll take Tikkun Olam, I'll sever it. He was the son of an Orthodox rabbi. I'll sever Tikkun Olam from the Jewish tradition. I'll come up with my own model for that. And his model that he ended up with was a very dangerous model. So Tikkun Olam is something we feel it intuitively, because that's what Jews are about. We were chosen to fix the world, but we cannot sever it from our tradition. Keep it connected, be proud of who you are, wear it on your sleeve, don't be embarrassed, and you'll find remarkable results from people. Just last week, we had a young man in Lakewood named Marquise Oliver. He wanted to lead a march in memory of George Floyd. And he wrote some really nasty things about the Jewish people online. And he said, I'm going to do a march in Lakewood. And I said, I want to meet this guy. I want to talk to him. And we set up a meeting. We brought a bunch of community leaders to this young man, and we spoke to him, and we shared of who we are, and we listened to him, and we heard his frustrations. He immediately went online and he said, this is a unity march. We're not against anybody. We're not against the Jews. And he scrubbed his media account of all his anti-Semitic things that he had said before. He blamed that someone had hacked his account, which wasn't really so true. We didn't make an issue out of it. It wasn't about making him feel bad. It was about letting him know that we respect him as a person. And then what did we do? We baked challah for all the marchers. So every marcher who went on the Shabbos march this past Shabbos in Lakewood in memory of George Floyd and to make a better society, they got a little challah from us. And the challah said, today is the Jewish Sabbath. This is the traditional bread. It's woven bread because it represents different elements that are woven together. It's not just a loaf of bread, but each piece it gets all tied in together. This is the fate of mankind. We're with you. That and cold water bottles and all, just that they should know, the marchers should know that in addition to the Orthodox Jews who were able to participate in the march on Shabbos, the Jewish community is with them. So we have to be out there with pride.
You've raised an important point, and I want to discuss it with Howie. And I brought it up earlier, and that's that, one wants to identify with a social movement that's positive and meaningful. But at the same time, there are those elements within, let's say, Black Lives Matters and others who are associated with them who are root and branch anti-Semites. And does one brush it all under the carpet? How does one address this issue? Joining the social movement, wanting change for better, wanting to make sure that there's no discrimination, racism, prejudice, and certainly not police who are empowered to kill people and not pay the price, but also not to be associated with people who would do anything that they could to undermine the Jewish community here in this country and the state of Israel, which is so central and core to who we are as Jews. It doesn't matter if you're a Zionist or non-Zionist. The state of Israel affects us all. So Howie, what would you say about that?
Well, I think we have to keep in mind, right, that not everyone is the same. Some of these movements do have people who are violently anti-Semitic and anti-Israel as their leaders, and some just as their members. But that doesn't taint everyone as a whole. Sure, I wouldn't join a group where Linda Sarsour was the head, who's anti-Semitic and anti-Israel and things like that. But there are plenty of other social movements groups that are fine and do not have anti-Semites or anti-Israel people at the head. And those are the types of groups to join. At AIPAC, right, we have students from Morehouse colleges who are way more pro-Israel than students from Beth Medrash Govoha. Right? Morehouse College is historically Black university. They're more pro-Israel, I think, almost than students from Yeshiva University. You know what I mean? These guys are really, really pro-Israel. And there are Black Americans across the country who are very pro-Israel and have joined the pro-Israel movement in a wonderful way, right? And Mayor Steve Benjamin, an African-American mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, spoke out at the last Democratic Platform Committee meeting he sounded better than I would, right, about his support for Israel, and spoke out against Bernie Sanders' platform to make sure that the Right Israel platform should be there, right? A true man of peace and a true one of men. So there's many African-American leaders and African-American people, right, who think just like we do, right? And therefore, we have to offer them our hand in peace. And those people are just as worried about George Floyd as the anti-Semites are, right? So I'm saying is we have to get involved, right? We just have to make sure we're involved with the right people and call out, as Jews, we have the responsibility to call out the people who are anti-Semitic and who are anti-Israel, because anti-Israel is also anti-Semitic in effect. Right? So I think in support of Israel, yes, we have to redouble our efforts to work with the African-American community, right? Just like we're working with the evangelical Christians and the Hispanic community and other communities as well. Because there are so many places we work. If we look back to the civil rights era, right? The Jews and the African-Americans were very close back then. You know, I live in Baltimore, right? And, you know, the Jewish community is very close with the African-American leadership. Rabbi Kotler was at my daughter's wedding, right? And Congressman Cummings, Elijah Cummings of blessed memory, was there. Congressman Fume, the new congressman, was there, along with some other African-American leaders, right? Who I happen to be personally very close with, and are wonderful, wonderful people. So I think we need to work with them both in race relations and in having them our brothers and sisters here in America, and in support of Israel.
Rabbi Kotler, I know that we've watched in some horror as over the past week, there's been thousands of people who have not been socially distanced, who've been protesting, and yet at the same time, our schools have not yet reconvened. I don't know if you've opened the Beth Medrash yet in Lakewood at BMG. How do you address this disparity between the huge tolerance that exists for flouting the rules when it comes to demonstrations and protests, and I hate to say it, riots, and yet law-abiding citizens have to cower in their homes and are not allowed to congregate and not allowed to study Torah? That's so important, so central to who we are, that we can sit in a Beth Medrash and study Torah. What are you saying to Governor Murphy?
So I said to Governor Murphy that Abraham Lincoln, one of the greatest leaders in American Jewish history, was not known for his defense of civil rights, but he won the Civil War. And Abraham Lincoln in his day was called a dictator. He was seen as having violated the Constitution in a time of war, and he went to extreme measures to win the war. That doesn't justify what General Grant did with his infamous order to expel the Jews from the Department of Tennessee for alleged black market trading, which Lincoln had to override. But Lincoln did some stuff that suspended civil liberties. Look, this is a time of emergency. People were dying. The images coming out of Italy and China were horrendous. And imagine if we would have had those types of images here in the United States. That was the last thing anyone wanted to see. So I think Phil Murphy, who's a good man, did the right thing. He jumped in to protect public health. And he jumped in strong and hard. New Jersey was hit pretty badly by COVID-19. And among the things he did were things that constitutionally might not stand up. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. My name's not Nat Lewin. I don't know if his order banning in-house worship, if that would stand up constitutionally. But I think he did the right thing. I think he did what was necessary to save lives. And the courts in the United States, for all of the political rhetoric, they're really good. They're going to sort this out. There have been cases in Kentucky, Kansas, Mississippi. We're watching those. Even in California, we're watching those very carefully. And I'm sure plenty of constitutional precedent will be set well before the next virus hits. As to the protest marches, I believe he made a mistake. And he made a mistake because as a leader, you always have to be the exceptional person that you go above and beyond in adherence to the law. So by him personally participating in the march, he did it, I think, out of good intent. He wanted to show the Black community that you're not disenfranchised, that this is not about you against the white society, but that the entire America feels your pain. Every American feels that. So he did it out of good intent, but I believe he made a mistake by marching in 2 locations before he lifted the restrictions. To his credit, yesterday, he lifted both the restrictions on in-house worship and on other constitutionally protected activities, such as free speech, allowing greater limits on those. So that would make the protest permitted. But I don't think he should have attended the protest. I think he should have gotten on TV or something and made some really strong statements. But for him to march in person in violation of his own order, I think he made a little bit of a mistake. And that's such a Jewish lesson, is the Melech, the king, had to have the Sefer Torah on his lap all the time. There's no man's above the law. The king had to sit there and listen as the Torah was read to him. We don't have political czars in this country. We don't have emperors and people who in some way, we don't have parties that the party is like in China where the party is exempt from the law. We're all subject to the law. So I wish he would have done better, but I know he only did it out of good intent, and I forgive him as a citizen for his mistake, especially for all the wonderful things he has done for our state. As to BMG, we're not yet back in our Beth Medrash. We're learning through a remote learning model, but we're rapidly moving with the blessing and the approval of the health authorities in the state and the state to the in-person model, because Torah is the foundation and the soul and spirit of the Jewish people.
Howie, you and I were not in BMG. I mean, we learned in yeshivas together, but you're in the world of
business. You learned, I hung out. But
whatever it is, but you know, I'm now in the professional rabbinate, you're in business. What is it that makes us love a place like BMG so much? So we walk into the Beth Medrash and we see all those people studying Torah, and we immediately feel emotional about it.
It's incredible.
We want to do whatever we can to help it. What is it? Why do you think?
When you mentioned my qualifications, you forgot the key one, that I'm chairman of the board of BMG.
That's right. You are chairman of the board. It's true.
Besides other things.
So what is it?
I obviously never studied there, right? My 2 boys, one studied in Israel, one is currently at Yeshiva University, right? And with wonderful Rabbeim. But when I was president of AIPAC and I traveled across America, I saw that Torah in America was built by BMG. Wherever I went, I met BMG rabbis like yourself. The Kolim were the majority BMG. Sure, while you had some Kolim, Chaim Berlin had a couple, New Israel had a couple, but the vast majority of them were from BMG. So BMG is singularly responsible for building Torah in America. So how do I not want a part of that? Then you walk into the Beth Medrashim, one of 9 Beth Medrashim, or 11 if you include the small ones, each one having 1,000 guys learning there. You know what? There's maybe 3 guys bottling outside when you get there, right? By the time you get back, they're gone. They're just taking a 5-minute break. 99.9% of those guys are learning nonstop. They don't even take breaks barely, any of them. The couple that need to, obviously, when I was in yeshiva, I took a break every 10 minutes, right? But these guys are just learning Torah Lishma. And with what's going on in America, when you think about it, right? Yes, we have close to 6,000 married students, but it's such a small percentage of Jews in America. And we're living in a time, the wealthiest time in the Jewish community, even after all the real estate guys have lost money now in COVID-19, we're wealthier than we've ever imagined we can be, right? So why shouldn't we have the merit, right? There's a chut to support the 7,000 Bachram and Kola Young alike, Kola fellows learning there. We could do it, and it's wonderful when you walk in, as you just said. So it's a true privilege for me to be involved and me to be a supporter of such an organization.
Rabbi Kotler, a year or 2 ago, I came with Isaac Herzog, who's head of the Jewish Agency. We visited several Beth Medrash, one which was a former Reform temple in Lakewood, one of which was a former conservative temple in Lakewood, being converted to study houses for the study of Gemara and everything else that one learns in Lakewood Yeshiva. He was not just impressed, he was overwhelmed. Of course, his family connection with the Kotler family also extends back many generations. How do you see your connection, or the connection of BMG, with the wider Jewish world, such as somebody who's an ardent Zionist, a former head of the Labour Party, now head of the Jewish Agency, but so many others with whom you and I and how we come into contact? How do we relate to them within our world to make sure that we haven't compromised who we are, but at the same time we can embrace them and involve them?
Well, first of all, the visit with Isaac was amazing, especially the family connections. It was like meeting a long lost uncle or brother. And I thank you, Rabbi, for bringing him to my home into the yeshiva. And we've kept such a beautiful bond since. And it wasn't so important to me that he was the head of the Jewish agency, so much as that family bond that we share going back generations. An amazing feeling. And he's an amazing person. Look, we represent something unique in the world. We represent a value proposition of what it means to be a Jew. And that Jew, whether the Jew lives in Africa or Egypt or Israel or Lakewood, New Jersey or California, there's still a common foundation. We're called the people of the book for a reason. The book we're talking about is not Philip Roth. The book we're talking about is the Torah. We're the people of the Torah. Torah study, just look behind you, Rabbi. Shelves full of books. Look behind Howard. Unfortunately, I'm not sitting facing my bookcases, but we're the people of Torah. That's our value proposition. It's a very noisy world. There's so many advocates and so many causes, so many things that people say are really important. We're out there, we have a consistent message. It's not that old message, it's only 3,300 years old. That message is, we are Jews because we gathered as a people at Sinai with a common heritage. That's what binds us. That message, by the way, is as applicable to myself as it is to Isaac Herzog, as it is to a Reformed Jew, a conservative Jew, a totally secular Jew, and it doesn't make a difference country or place. Someone once asked me, he says, Rabbi, what makes you feel so connected as a Jew? And I said to him, look at my shelves, look at my bookshelves. Here's a book written by the Rambam, by Maimonides, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. If he walked into the room, I would have 100 questions for him to immediately talk about, why'd you say this? How did you understand that? What was your ruling on this? And the same thing with Rashi, and the same thing with the Balei Tosfos, the same thing with the Chassam Sofer. We're connected to the Jews of all generations through the Torah. That's what binds us as a people. For us in Lakewood, it's staying on message, never to get distracted. Not that the other things are not important. Chesed is important. We have the greatest chesed system here in Lakewood. If your car breaks down, Chaverim will take care of you. You don't need to call AAA. If you need food, you don't need to call the food bank. Tomchei Shabbos, if you're sick, Bikkur Cholim will take care of you. And we take care of all. BMG created a health center with the blessing of Chairman Howard. We created a health center. We see over 200,000 patients a year. 25% are Hispanic people who are poor. It's not just for us. We do all of that. But amidst the noise of life, there's one value proposition. Jewish people are the people of Torah. Let's make sure we have Torah in our midst. That message resonated with Isaac so well because his grandfather was the first chief rabbi. Of course, he only got the job because of my grandfather and great-grandfather's support because they were so close, but he was the first chief rabbi of Palestine and of Israel. So he understands that message. And I think most Jews, when we breathe and we step back from the arguments and the discussions and the love and the fighting around that we have, we all get that. We know Torah is the greatest value. I have to share an anecdote because Howard said something before. A friend of mine was at a real estate conference in Vegas, in a shopping center conference, and filled with Jews. For some reason, Jews like real estate. It's the one non-portable item. So I don't know why we love it so much, but so many Jews, all Jews. And my friend Ralph Hertzka, who runs one of the largest lenders in the country, Meridian Capital, he was scheduled to speak. And he thought, here I am speaking at a conference about real estate. Should I say a Dvar Torah? He said to himself, I'm not sure, even though I really should say one, but this is a business conference. I'm not going to say a Dvar Torah. So he gets up and he speaks about industry trends, borrowing, Fannie, Freddie, all the good stuff, more MBS, mortgage-backed security, all the wonderful things. When he finishes, the next speaker was Senator Cory Booker. Cory Booker gets up and he says, it would not be appropriate for me to address this audience without opening with a Dvar Torah, and he began with a Dvar Torah. So if it's good enough for the senator from New Jersey, a wonderful man, member of the African American community, a Dvar Torah is good enough for everybody.
Absolutely. I remember Cory Booker from Oxford, and he was exceptional there, and he's exceptional today with all the trials and tribulations that he has been through. You know, we're going to end with this, that I think that we were all in yeshiva, or we got into adulthood at around the same time in the 1980s, when the world was a very different place, in some ways far less complex. Things were much more simple and more black and white. And you know, the way our parents trained us to become adults and to address society and to be involved in the Jewish community is quite different from what we have to tell our own children and address their challenges going forward. And we'll begin with Howie, what would your message be to the next generation? The message, it can't be the same message that we, in a sense, received from our parents, because the world is more complex. And yet we have to bring the essence of our parents' education to us when we were all in yeshiva at the same time, and we have to give that message over to our children. What would be your message to your children and to your friends' children who were in that period in their life when they have to make those important choices?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm a layman. You rabbis could give that message a lot better than me. But from the limited that I can, the message that I would give is, that family is really important. All our people have gotten very much into their friends and traveling and doing these things. But the basics is being with your family, taking care of your children, taking care of your parents, taking care of your elderly parents or elderly grandparents, and doing things for your family, right? Because now, sure, we all do for our family, but I think a moment like this has clarified for us how important that is, right? That we need to do for our family, and the family comes first. That's who we're spending time with, and that's who, when they have their trials and tribulations now, that's who we're being with. So I think that's, of course, we should all have friends and do it, but I think we need to reconcentrate more on our family. And the second thing is, we have to reconcentrate more on our community. Sure, we all want to make money, and we make money, we give charity to our community, but it's even more important to support our community, because our community is who's still, like Rabbi Kotler said, what's happening in Lakewood, our community is who's standing up with us. And I think that's what we need to do.
And Rabbi Kotler, what would your message be for the future for our children to take forward with them, especially in the midst of this crisis and challenging time?
I'm unique maybe in the sense that I grew up with Holocaust survivor parents. My mother's parents were murdered. My mother's father was murdered in the Kovna Ghetto, 1941. My mother's mother was murdered with the partisans in the forests of 1944, August 16th, 1944. And I grew up around people who had seen the worst and created the best. And the message I've been sharing with my children is that it's not worth our while to look at hardship as necessarily, it is a negative, it's a hardship, but look at the growth opportunities, look what you can do as we emerge from hardship. We can emerge, if we do things right, stronger and better. And we've never been known to sit and mope around, look at the past. I told my children what my friend Jack Bistritza told me. My friend Jack went to his father, Morris Bistritza, who was a Holocaust survivor living in Brooklyn in his 90s. And he said, "Dad, tell me, what did you do in May 1945 after we had seen so much loss, so much destruction, starving, emaciated, suffering in the DP camps?" And his father says, "You know what we did? We started getting married. We started building businesses. We started building our families. We started building our communities, building our Torah institutions, and just rebuilding. And then from there, we pivoted to building the state of Israel. And we as a nation, we're about building a future." So I tell my kids, don't focus too much on, look, I lost too many friends to COVID-19. Ziv Rothschild and Ellie Buttknecht and Batsal Bertram. I can go on with the names of people that we lost, and that's tragic. But we have to remember those people. But we also have to really stay focused on the future. Let's build our families, build our communities. Let's open a new chesed organization, open a new school. Let's open a new project. Let's do things we never did before. Let's reach out to a new neighbor, support our communities, and as Howard said, our families and our institutions. And let's not focus on the negativity and the tragedy. Let's focus on hope and the future.
Well, on that wonderful note, it's been a great pleasure speaking to you both. Thank you so much, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, Beth Medrash Govoha in Lakewood. Thank you so much to Howard Friedman of Lanx and of BMG and of OU and of course of AIPAC. Thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, Rabbi Dunner.
Thank you.